Hey guys, welcome back to MFO. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I talk a lot about getting out and doing some fall fishing. I love the benefits that fall fishing does. The boat ramps aren't busy. You can get out and enjoy nature, the crisp autumn temperatures, and the fact that you can have some really good days on the water in the fall. But there are some safety hazards that come along with fishing in the fall. Today, we're going to talk about 7 safety tips to pay attention to if you go out on the water in the fall. Guys, stick around. You're going to want to hear this. This is really important. Welcome back to Mark Fisher Outdoors, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher. We've got 7 tips that you really need to pay attention to if you're going out fishing in the fall. And quite honestly, some of the benefits that I mentioned about fishing during the autumn time, things like there not being a lot of guys at the boat ramps and the crisp, cool temperatures and the beautiful scenery and all of those pluses, those reasons to get out are also the potential dangers that you have to be aware of if you choose to go out in the fall. So let's talk about the 7 safety tips and why they're important, just so that you can be aware of that for those fall fishing trips. The number 1 is the weather. Obviously, with fall, we get into a situation where the temperatures and the weather changes pretty drastically day to day. We're experiencing this now. We've had temperatures that are cool, and then now all of a sudden this week we're going to get temperatures back up into the mid 60s. So excellent, you might want to get out there, but the next day, or quite honestly even later that day, temperatures may drop. You want to be looking at the temperature and kind of planning your trips as opposed to just going out whenever you get that day off, right? Okay. Let's talk about the second thing, and it kind of goes along with that, and you need to dress for the weather. Fall is definitely a time when you want to dress in layers. You want to make sure that, you get out early in the morning. It may be very different temperature-wise at 7 in the morning compared to what it's going to be like at noon. Hey, the forecast is going to be in the upper 50s. Awesome. But when you get out on the lake in the beginning of the morning, it could be 35. There's that much of a temperature change between nighttime temperatures and midday temperatures. So dress in layers, dress warmly, and be prepared to shed those layers as it gets warmer during the day. But here's a tip that I want you to all seriously think about. And that is, in addition to the clothes that you're wearing, pack a Ziploc bag, a bigger Ziploc bag, and pack a pair of sweatpants, a pair of socks, a sweatshirt, and put that in your boat somewhere. If you should happen to fall in the water, and we're going to talk about water temps in just a minute, getting out of wet clothes in the fall is going to be vitally important. And wearing wet clothes while you're trying to make it into shore, if you've fallen in the lake and then you get in your boat and you got to make it back, being able to get out of those wet clothes and put dry clothes on is going to be critically important. Hypothermia can happen very quickly. And when hypothermia is beginning to set in, you lose mental cognitive functioning. That's one of the symptoms that hypothermia is setting in. And the last thing you want is to be in that situation where you don't have your wits about you as you're trying to get from a dangerous situation back to a safe situation, and you don't want that dangerous situation to turn into potentially life-threatening. So if you were to fall in, by having that extra set of clothing, you can get out of those wet clothes, put dry clothes on. What I look at is, if I've got a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt, maybe a pair of socks, I can get out of my wet clothes. I can put those clothes on. That may not make me warm, but then if I put, say, my rain gear on over that, and my rain gear is always in the boat. So now I've got a position where I've got sweatpants, sweatshirt, rain gear. I'm warm enough to be able to get myself back on to, back to the launch, back to dock, and be able to take care of myself in that situation. Have that set of dry clothing. And that leads us to the third safety tip, and that is water temperatures. You absolutely need to be aware of the fact that the water temperatures are no longer, obviously, no longer in the 70s and 80s. They're dropping down into the 50s and getting colder, which means that you absolutely have that hypothermia risk. You want to be aware of your conditions, stay out of the water at all costs. But if you do fall in the water, have a safety plan available to get back onto your boat and get dry clothes on. Dry clothes is a tip, and if you ever want to know about getting back onto your boat, I did an episode a while back about using your motor's trim to get back on the boat. Check that video out if you haven't seen that one. The fourth safety tip that we want to talk about is it's fall and leaves are falling, winds are blowing, things like that. You do need to be on the lookout for debris in the lake. Debris can be a hassle when you're fishing, trying to fish, having your baits getting hung up on leaves that are floating in the water, pine needles that are floating in the water, things like that. But you do also want to pay attention to what debris can be getting clogged in your motor intake, or if there is fallen branches or things like that that are in the water itself. You don't want to be in a situation where you get stuck on the water. And I want to go back to being stuck on the water. As we talked about, fall fishing means there's fewer people on the lake. You need to be aware of the fact that it's not like the middle of summer. If you have a problem on the lake, you flag somebody down, they come over and help you, tow you back, or you may be one of the only people out on the lake. So being in a position where you're a little more weary of problems so that they don't occur. In the summer, if a problem happens, there's someone there to help you. In the fall, they may not be there to help you. And if they're not there to help you, you may be spending a longer period of time on the water. And in the summer, if you ended up sleeping on your boat, you slept on your boat. In the fall, it's going to be chilly. And now you're taking a situation that is maybe uncomfortable and not pleasant to potentially dangerous. So make sure you're spending more time preparing so that small problems don't happen. Again, that relates to the fact that on the sixth issue, there's less light. It's going to get darker sooner, so you need to kind of make sure that you don't have as much time, and all of a sudden, at 4:00, it's getting dark. So you want to kind of prepare for those shorter days. And this is probably the most important, the seventh tip, and that is make sure that you have a way to communicate, a cell phone, a radio, and also use a float plan. Pilots have a flight plan. Hey, I'm taking off from this airport and I intend to fly to this, and someone knows when they're taking off and when they expect to land. Especially in the fall, you should have a float plan. Somebody, I would let Megan know or a buddy know or whatever, but let somebody know, hey, I'm planning on going fishing on Lake Geneva. My plan is to get there around 9:00. I expect to be off the water by 2 p.m. I'll give you a call when I'm off the water. If I don't call, that lets that person know, wait a minute, I'm going to call them and make sure everything's okay, because I expected to hear from him by 2:15 or so. Have a float plan. You don't want to be in a situation where you had your phone with you, you dropped it in the lake, you fell in the lake, it won't turn on, and you're out there floating in the lake and nobody's even expecting you to be home. You want someone to know, hey, we better start trying to communicate with him because we haven't heard from him. Those are 7 tips, guys, that for being safe in the fall. It's a great time to fish. I'm not looking to scare you out of going fishing in the fall. but I do want you to be smart about it. Obviously, I'm not saying things that you should do anytime, like make sure you wear a life jacket, be safe, follow the rules of the road when you're on the water, all of those types of things go without saying. But pay attention to these 7 tips when you're out fishing in the fall. Guys, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow on another episode of Mark Fisher Outdoors. Take care, everybody.